what I really would like to talk about is what is spirituality and what's it for anyway. I feel inspired to talk about this because, as some of you know, I've been doing quite a bit of blogging for the Huffington Post. And I've had 2 blogs on recently that have been about the evolution of spirituality, and this time it's about God, humanity. I was actually evolution, humanity, and God. The first one was about, are we ready to let spirituality evolve? And I would like to share some experience that I'm having with you. I have no idea what I'm going to say about spirituality, by the way, but I feel inspired by my experience with the Huffington Post, because I was at first writing for their spirituality segment, and people were attacking what I was saying because it wasn't godlike enough. And this time, I have been published in what they call the TED Weekend section in support of a video and article by Louise Leakey, who is a very well-known paleontologist who gave us some, for many of us, new information about evolution. And in that area, I shouldn't say my column is being attacked by a lot of scientists. So the scientists are attacking me for having God, and the religious and spiritual people are attacking me for not having God. And I'm fine. So there's a lot of comments going back and forth, and then what I love is then they start fighting with each other, and then I'm out of it, But I do make an effort to respond to people whether they're serious or at least semi-serious, to have a dialogue, because my intention is to have a conversation. Now, I totally understand. I can say that I am that. Most of the people who are writing have their own opinions and are looking for a platform for them. And I wonder sometimes if they've even read my article, or they just saw the topic and said, oh goody, an opportunity for me to say something. And I don't have a blog on the Huffington Post, so this is the next best thing. So I mean that, when I say that, I mean that with respect, because I can understand those feelings, and I could be that, except that I happen to be on the other side of that. So I'm having this experience as opposed to that experience. But what I have found over and over in dealing with the comments is that very few people ever address the topic that I'm bringing up. They will fixate on something that I have said that they can disagree with and then make some point about, and completely avoid the issue that I'm trying to raise. And have I ever done that to anyone else? Never. Does anyone else identify with that? Yeah. Oh my God, I am so that. And it's a real eye-opener for me, because I'm always embarrassed when I see myself in public. But it makes me think about, well, what have I been trying to say that people are not addressing? And in the article about letting spirituality evolve, it's to look at our spiritual beliefs and ask ourselves in an honest way if any of them are hurting us. And I think someone may have a cell phone on, so.
No, it's computer music.
Oh, it's the computer music? Okay. So that was the question that I raised in that article. And in this one, I'm talking about God as evolving, which is something that I began to speak of in the last video, and really seeing God as part of evolution, and evolution as being part of God. Because we talk about oneness, but when it comes to God, we are not very in the oneness. So there is still, for most people, a real hierarchical sense of God is above us and we are below. And part of what I'm raising in this is, what is the impact of having that belief system? And, I'm talking about shame because we're not perfect and God is perfect, a lack of oneness with God, alienation, and so on. And it also separates science and spirituality, which is something which is kind of silly in a way, because if you do believe, and when I'm using God, I define it very differently from the way it is defined in religion. First of all, I acknowledge that God is a word and a concept that we are imposing on an experience. We have an experience that we call God. It can be a very transcendental experience where we feel just uplifted, enlightened, a little bit, elevated from our when I say elevated, I don't mean like we're in some other, on some other planet, but that we rise above the momentary reactivity, anxiety, fear, anger, whatever it is, and we go into a more integrated consciousness where we're not so dominated by some aspect of ourselves that's running the shit out of us. And some of us have experience of God as guidance. Do this, do that. I have a constant experience of what I'm calling God as guidance, which is do this, do that. Not only in every moment of my life, but especially importantly in work as a counselor, where I'm always tuned into what am I supposed to do next, and what am I supposed to say, and what is real here. And I see that as a level of consciousness that is beyond my own. Now, I don't see that as being outside of evolution, because my understanding is that all of consciousness and the totality is evolving, and therefore I don't see any contradiction whatsoever between my evolution, the species evolution, the planet or the universe's evolution, and the God evolution, especially if you understand God as a kind of energy field of which we are a part. I mean, one analogy for it that I use all the time because it's so simple to understand is I am a cell in the body of God. God is the totality and I am the cell. And I don't have any meaning, significance, or life outside the body, because if I'm taken out of the body, I will die. And the whole body can't exist without its cells, because we're all integral to it. So it's a kind of it's an analogy, it's a metaphor that can be helpful. There are many other ways that I could talk about it, and I don't even have to use the word God, because in many ways there is no God in the sense that we've understood it. And now I want to explain what I mean by that is I don't believe, this is my belief, that there is like some man in the sky who's looking down and is planning everything and knows what he's doing. And how this connects to the Louise Leakey video, which I was asked to comment on, that's how I got into this mess. The Huffington Post said, would you write a blog on this for this TED weekend? And she was talking about how scientists were very surprised to discover, and this was several years ago, that there was not one ancestor of humanity. That from an evolutionary perspective, there were 3 ancestors who lived simultaneously, which kind of shakes up the whole idea of linear evolution. Like, oh, it went from this guy to that guy to that guy to the woman, who is the top of the evolutionary ladder. Just checking to see if you're asleep. If you didn't laugh, you're sleeping. Okay, so that was a very interesting piece of information that has been verified by other, studies and other paleontology. So I said, okay, well, if that's true, let's ask the question, what could that do to our vision of God? And so then I had this kind of funny story about Mr. and Mrs. God talking, and he's just winging it. God is trying all these prototypes and looking down and saying, and Mrs. God says, you got to do something about these guys. Everybody's going to say that these guys were made in your image and they look like a bunch of gorillas. What does that mean about you? That you're just a big gorilla? And it's kind of facetious. But anyway, God says, well, these are prototypes, and But in a way, there's something so fundamentally important about considering this as an alternative view of God or spirituality, is to because I was guided by God. God came to me basically and told me God didn't exist. So what can I tell you? I had this mystical experience, you know, the whole bit with the white light and the whole, and God said, remember Beth, God is changing. And somebody corrected me, of course. One of the commentators said there was a difference between change and evolution, and you know, but the point is that God is changing for a purpose, is moving in a direction, and that's evolution. I was chastised for not understanding evolution in a scientific way, you see. But of course it misses the entire point that I'm trying to make, which is that the whole of the universe is evolving, and we don't have to believe. You can believe it if it works for you. And I say this over and over. Whatever. If it works, keep it. You know, these are beliefs. These are human ideas that we are projecting to try to explain reality. And of course we're going to try to explain reality in a way that makes us the center of the universe and that we're being taken care of by Daddy, because that's our first experience of God anyways. You know, when Daddy or Mommy or Grandpa or the babysitter, you know, we're infants, and there is this all-knowing, omniscient being that comes along and sticks a bottle in our mouth or a boob or whatever it is and changes our diaper, or doesn't, and that's God. So it's very understandable that we have almost hardwired into us a vision of a God, a godlike creature that you have to manage and placate and pull on and pray to by crying or whatever it takes to get your needs met. And so from that moment in our own personal evolution, there it is, there's God, and that is God to us. And so it's very understandable that people would then carry through and continue to have that vision of God, especially because life is so unpredictable and so difficult. We're always trying to manage it, aren't we? Trying to feel safe, and if I get married, I'll feel safe. That didn't work. So understanding from a psychological perspective that we have a need for safety, and that also from a psychological perspective from the beginning of our experience of life, there are God-like creatures who determine our destiny because we're helpless infants, it's very understandable that we would have this vision of God. And of course, starting with a God from so many thousands of years ago, that conception came out of a time when we had very little scientific explanation for anything. Everything is God. Well, in a sense, everything is God. If we define God as to include everything, and I mean, God is a definition. It's a word. It's a projection. And it's also an experience that I mentioned that some of us have, which is like a mystical experience or feelings that we associate with God. So is there a problem with this? Well, it's only a problem if it's not working, if it makes us passive, if it makes us feel like children, or if, on the contrary, we try to be God, which is the other side of the spectrum, where we've gone from, you know, do me, God, just do me, to I am God. I, the ego, Beth, am God. You know, this could be a problem too. So I'm asking us to look at, but talk about the clash of the titans. If we've got all these gods in the same room, this could create a little conflict, especially if we don't all want the same thing. And of course what I'm talking about is connecting to a higher consciousness, a consciousness that is able to integrate the consciousness of everybody in this room, plus the ants, plus the stars, plus everything else, the consciousness that can integrate all the knowing that we have that is so fragmented and partial for us. And that consciousness, integrated consciousness in the process of evolution, is what I call God. Now, why do I choose that way of being with God? Because it allows me to be a part of evolution and a co-creator, and simultaneously gets me beyond my little ego that thinks that I'm really in control of the universe. That's cool. And at the same time, it takes me out of the shame and blame of being in a universe created by a perfect God who somehow made a mistake with his creation. To me the joke is they say, well, but it's free will. We screw everything up because of our free will, but who created that free will? Who created the human beings who have the visceral reactions, the fear, the anger, and all of that leads us into doing destructive and self-destructive things? So to me that's a circular argument. Okay, so here we have it. And in my experience, since everything else is evolving and I'm a part of God, it would make sense that I'm evolving, that God is evolving too. Now, does that work for you? Does that help to answer questions that you couldn't answer before? For many of us, we have made ourselves extremely stupid. By the way, I'm going to come back to the point that I started with, which is what is spirituality, but I seem to be getting to it a long way around. Are your spiritual beliefs making you passive? Are your spiritual beliefs puffing you up? Are your spiritual beliefs making you feel ashamed because you're not living up to them, or because they're not accomplishing what you think they're supposed to accomplish? I prayed 12 days on my knees and my mother still died. Or I visualized myself as 6'4" and I didn't grow. Or whatever it is that your particular version of beliefs are, if they are supporting you, great. And if they're problematic, then common sense tells us that it's the belief that can change. But we are so attached to our beliefs. It's like we cling to them as though they were the truth, as though any human being could ever know the truth. I am not saying that what I say is true. And that would be a ridiculous statement. I don't have the awareness, the consciousness. I try to tune in to a higher level of consciousness than my own, which is where I've gotten these ideas from. I didn't come up with this stuff. It didn't fit my picture. So, naturally I think it's better. But hey, I'm not saying that you can't think your beliefs are better than mine. Just acknowledge that they're beliefs. But to hang on to them as though they were truth can make us sick, can make us stupid. We have to make ourselves stupid. You have a belief that wholly contradicts your experience. Which goes? Yeah, just pretend that the experience, make it your fault. Somehow I didn't pray well enough. I didn't do the right thing. I saw a very, very touching film on very religious Jews who were trying to keep the extreme Orthodox belief system and were gay. And there was no place for them in society. And their rabbis and so on were telling them to get over gayness because, it didn't fit in the belief system. And they had, one of the systems was you took a rubber band and every time you had a gay thought, you snapped it and hurt yourself. And this is going to be, as a Pavlovian attempt to undo your gayness through negative reinforcement. What about giving up the idea instead? Why not give up the belief? And people ultimately began to rebel against that. It makes me want to cry. But there are so many belief systems that are still hurting people. Beliefs that make us feel shameful, sinful, and that cause us, therefore, to not go into the inquiry about ourselves because we're so afraid of feeling the shame of knowing ourselves. And that's a huge block, is to be afraid to be self-aware because you're afraid that you're going to see something that's going to make you feel shame. Belief systems that keep us passive, we're not doing anything. We are co-creating climate change. We have to do something. We can't wait for some mythical God to come down from the heavens and do this for us. That's another kind of way that we can hurt ourselves and one another. People believe that we've been given dominion over the earth. I don't think so. We are part of the earth. The coyotes think that they've been given dominion over our dogs, I have to say, having just lost one recently. And I don't blame them for feeling that way. You know, we're all in our egos. We have territory. You know, we want to control the resources for our own survival. That's what that means. You know, we are trying to elevate human consciousness in the sense that we're trying to understand things in a bigger perspective. It's like, well, what is the coyote's perspective and what is our perspective? And what is the child's perspective? And what's the eagle's perspective? We're trying to integrate all of that so that we are more capable of being in reality by putting together, you know, it's that old story about the elephant. If you only have the leg, or you only have the tail, or you only have the schnoz, you know, you don't get the whole picture. So we're trying to bring more awareness. Higher consciousness to me means more awareness integrated, so that we can make decisions based on the knowledge that the elephant is all of that, plus more that we can't even see, all the energy fields around that elephant that we can't even see with the naked eye. But why do people believe that you have to reject spirituality in order to do that? You know, why is there such an attack on anyone who dares, not by everyone of course, on people who would dare to think and have spirituality at the same time? It's like, why is it there a need to drag out the straw man and attack it and say, well, you know, obviously this is religion, because you use the word God. I want to talk a little bit now about spirituality. You know, what is it for? If it isn't for changing the way or enhancing the way that we treat ourselves and one another and the earth, who are we kidding? I think the thing that disturbs me most is that we have these nonsensical arguments about beliefs and miss the whole boat, which is, how am I treating myself? How am I treating you? How are we treating one another? How are we treating the earth? What are we doing? Isn't that the point? It's that I feel the connection. Spirituality, in my way of thinking, this is a belief, is really essentially about feeling connected. Connected to the heavens and earth and to whatever is beyond. Connected to the animals, the vegetables, and the minerals. Connected to one another. Connected to ourselves. We don't even connect to ourselves. Many times. How can we be in a place of spiritual well-being if we're trashing our bodies? Bad food. When I say bad food, I don't mean food that's poisonous in the normal sense. I mean food that is poisonous because it doesn't support the body, like sugar and so on. If we're using chemicals, if we are not exercising, I am guilty. If we're not getting enough sleep, I am even more guilty. You know, if we let our brains run us and we are disconnected from our bodies, I am triply guilty. What happens to our spirituality? Here's this irony. We want to be spiritual, and yet at the same time, we're not taking care of our bodies. How calm and relaxed are we going to be when our bodies are stretched to the max? We're not going to be. How clear is our thinking going to be? The mind, this is what I've been guided, because you know I'm a mystic. So what does that mean? That means that I have these thoughts that I believe. Have these experiences that I actually think are real. And they come to me from a plane that is beyond what my own normal conscious mind could drum up. So that's what I'm talking about. And I was told by this inner voice back in the early 90s that the body, mind, and spirit come into creation simultaneously. That nothing is dominant. That the spirit is not dominant. That the body isn't dominant and the mind isn't dominant. It's like, duh! What a novel thought. And I can see, now I'm not going to argue whether or not that's true, but I can see that as a belief, it has a certain impact, which means that I know that in order to be more spiritual, I have to be more well. Now, this is not to put down people who are sick, because I happen to be one of those people. You know, I've been chronically ill for 53 years. But that doesn't mean that I can't support my body to the optimal level that it is capable of. And that's what I'm committed to doing when I can get my head to shut up long enough so I can go to sleep. Without taking a sleeping pill. And so what is the impact of that belief? It's an honoring of all of us, our body, our minds, and our spirits. That they are all one, just like we and God are one. The heavens and the earth are one. And I love that, because that makes everything one. And that means that I can't hurt you without hurting myself. And that means that, as we've all noticed, that we can't trash our planet without dire consequences to our health and well-being. And that when we're too far out there with the mind or the spirit, and when they're not all connected, we can go off in some pretty screwed up directions that we call spiritual. Because they're not whole. And this is part of evolution. We got to have this experience. I'm perfectly willing for you to throw out the new spirituality, which we are talking about and advocating. But question your own. Ask yourself the questions that I'm asking. What is the impact of this particular belief? What is it doing to me? How am I treating my body, mind, and spirit because of it? How am I treating others? How am I treating the earth? I believe that if we all did this, spirituality would evolve. Thank you.